Hey, good day, everyone. This is Steve Hess, Director of User Experience at BOM. My apologies for the late start. I was having a little technical issues here on my end. If anyone could please let me know maybe in the chat that you can hear me okay, and then we can get started. Yeah, let me see. Okay, can anyone? Okay, I think we're ready to get started. Again, my apologies for the late start. Welcome to webinar number 15 of the webinar series. This will be the last webinar for 2019. I hope you've all had a very nice 2019. As part of this webinar, we're going to take a quick kind of review of sort of what got us here, and revisit a few of the more recent topics, and then let me share my desktop here. I think you're not seeing it. And then we will go. Apologies, and then we will, and then we'll dive into this. So again, sorry, just a few things here. I'm having a little technical problem on my end. I think I've got it straightened out. So, okay, today's topic is sharing your BOM, and essentially who gets what. Like all of our previous webinars, this will be a 30-minute or less discussion with a live sample demo. The topic today is essentially deciding, now that I've gone through this process of building a bill of material and doing the other things, how do I share it with my organization? And more importantly, who gets what information throughout my organization? We're going to throw up a graphic here in just a second. We're going to do a live demo as well. So very important, I will be keeping this to 30 minutes or less. I realize we did get a late start, but we're going to keep it under the 30 minutes. So we will be sharing this the presentation with everyone as always. There's a few definitions to get us started. A few new ones for this week are role and view. And a role is defined for this presentation as just a persona or responsibility within my company. Maybe someone works in the QA department, or they're in purchasing or something. That's their role. And then a view is a lens which that particular person sees the data or sees my BOM through. And we're going to define that a little bit more as well. So then you can refer back to this page as you wish. Who needs what? This is sort of a quick graphic of what your organization might look like. You may have a bill of materials in Excel or some other BOM management tool, and you've got different individuals within your organization that need to see that bill of material in a different way. Maybe your engineers or your production planners are in-house. Obviously, your suppliers or your contract manufacturers are probably external. So, how do we control what data everyone sees, give them the appropriate access, but yet not reveal too much information to them? Cost and other things we might not want to reveal to our suppliers or to our contract manufacturers. But contract manufacturers, for example, do need access to maybe the drawings or the CAD models. So we're gonna take a look at that as well. So, stop me along the way if you have some questions. I'll try to keep an eye on the chat box. So, okay, what's a bill of material? Let's just kind of throw back a couple of weeks to webinar number 13, where we defined bill of material to be a list of all materials, information, and quantities required in a process. So here we've got a guy thinking about building a skateboard, and what information and materials and lists of parts are needed to do that. So we're going to think about our BOM as following this definition. There's lots of others out there that are much more complicated than that. So take a simple approach to that. In webinar number 12, we took a dive into, and by the way, these are links up here. And if you get a hold of this presentation, which will be shared out with you, you can follow those links to the YouTube broadcasts of earlier webinars. So what we did, we decided, hey, an essential elements or an essential bill of material had really two things in it. Webinar 12, we take a deep dive into what those two things are, but they are essentially an item master, which is a catalog, an inventory of all the parts and their usage, and we define usage to be part number and quantity. I've got 4 of part number 100, and its information comes from the item master. Part number 100 is the tape, and it has all this other information. We aggregate that together in this bill of materials down here, and that is our essential BOM. Now, I will concede that in webinar number 12, this essential BOM was fairly academic, and for the purposes of that webinar, probably overly simplified. So we're going to kind of get past that. We're going to get down to kind of a real bill of material with real people consuming data from it. So for now, webinar 12 was a nice review of what we did there. Webinar 14, we took a dive into the process of distributing that BOM to members in my organization and what activities they were involved in. Essentially, webinar 14 was an exercise in looking at your organization, having a meeting, putting pen to paper, and writing some things down. And this is from that webinar, and we looked at what the various stages were through production in our sample organization. You can see we go everything from validating the item master, which is some fancy terms for do we have enough parts in stock and what are they and who's responsible for that, all the way down to the other end, which is the product gets out the door. That's sales and billing. Maybe there's an inventory manager involved there, and we also identified as part of this process which part of our essential BOM those people need to have access to. It might be just a bill of material. Maybe they're a contributor. Maybe they update inventory or cost values. Maybe they need to have write access to that item master, that catalog. Maybe they're just, maybe they're a consumer. Maybe they're in the assembly line, or maybe they're a machine operator who is actually cutting parts. And they need access to the BOM, but maybe it's only read-only. And maybe it's only in a particular view. And that's what we're going to dive into here today. What is the view of that data that these individuals need? So we took that. So for today, I took that output from last week's webinar, and I kind of reflected on it and thought, these are the roles that we're going to focus on. There's more on that you can see they're identified. But I want to focus on these 4, and I want to dive into what information is required by these 4 people and what their roles are. And you can see we've got engineer, SLM manager, and etc. So that's what we're going to do in this presentation, is take a look at those roles and what data and how we get that data to them. So the title of this slide is how do we present meaningful information of specific roles, and this is really the essence of what we're going to do over the next 10 or 15 minutes. Okay, so with that in mind, with that last slide sort of in mind, start thinking about, and this is key here, I want to start thinking about kind of slicing our BOM rather than making copies. And this is the stage where if you're using Excel or Google Sheets or something, this is sort of where traditionally we start to get in trouble. And the reason for that is we start making copies because we're thinking about, hey, look, our engineer there needs access to this particular data set in red. Maybe our maintenance team only needs access to those that are in blue. And with Excel or others, some other types of tools, my only option there is to make a copy and delete those columns. Maybe I can hide them if they're my internal internal people, but if I'm sending this outside, I probably don't want to send, unit price out to, one of my vendors. So this is sort of a generic slide with the intent to have you start thinking about, the roles on the right and, how their access to the data is, it will be governed. So this is a great slide to, something to, again, to put pen to paper and start, writing this sort of thing down. After you've standardized on the properties across the top, you can start identifying, what the roles are and who needs access to those. And we're going to do that in a live demo in just a few minutes. So, what we want, again, the point here is to start thinking about slicing that data rather than making copies. Okay, so taking it just a little bit deeper, now we've kind of thought about, how we slice that data, and now we start thinking about, okay, some specifics. So let's think about this as, what a view would look like for an engineer, what a view for a supplier, and perhaps, some of my data actually has, maybe a manufacturing code. So we think about, sort of parsing this data in two axes, the lines across the items, and then identifying them by some code that we're going to do in our example here. In this example, we've said, hey, look, I want to show these two items because their manufacturing code is CNC, and I want to build a view for my manufacturing guy that goes to my CNC operator. He doesn't need to see nuts and bolts and other things that we buy as different commodity codes. So we've looked through our bill of material, we've identified some meaningful commodity codes in our example. One of them is CNC, and we've said, hey, look, we're going to share only these items in yellow, with our supplier. A CNC operator, very common for them to need access to a drawing or even a CAD model that maybe you've got a SolidWorks model or a Inventor model or something that you're actually going to link in here and pass off to them. So this is where we start really getting down to defining those roles. So even diving a little bit deeper, what does a typical engineering view look like? And we see we've identified Chris and Steve are in the engineering group, Joe and John are in the CNC manufacturing group, and what are the types of things that they want to see? So by again, a little pen to paper here, writing down your engineering view and writing down those properties that particular role needs to see. Always part number, always description. In most cases, quantity, lead times and suppliers. Maybe the CNC guy doesn't need to see those, and of course there could be some other information that the CNC guys might need to see. So another way of just kind of taking that down a little bit lower level of abstraction and defining our needs. We're gonna use this in just a second when we go through a live demo. Okay, so I know that we've done a lot of skateboard work over the last few weeks and webinars. I'm going to continue with this, for now, just kind of close out on this. And for 2020, I'll come with a new sample part. But I just want to remind you that this is what our design looked like over the last few webinars. This is in SolidWorks, and I've got a skateboard. I like the skateboard because it has multiple levels. There's multiple instances of subassemblies. There's structure and instancing and things, but promise to come with something new next time. So this is now, and we talked about kind of getting away from that academic view of the BOM. This is what the BOM really looks like for my skateboard model. Some familiar things on the left. I've computed, a cost is coming from my catalog, and I've computed extended cost over here, which is cost times quantity. I've also, for each one of the parts in my catalog, I've assigned a manufacturing product code or manufacturing type, and I've figured out what the lead time is for one of those, added vendor information, et cetera, et cetera. So this, this kind of scrolls to the right. So this is sort of a level of complexity, and you quickly see that, the nice picture that I showed in the earlier webinars of the academic BOM, is easy to kind of take it all in. And when you start seeing, all the data here, it's time to start reducing this down so that individuals can consume it in a more meaningful way. And it's easier for me as well. I often create a view for myself when I'm working in bills of material that just have the things I want to see. So the purpose of this slide is to show that how even something as simple as the skateboard can quickly become, a little bit overwhelming. And this just has 12 items in it. So, okay. So I'd like to jump into a live demo here. I'm going to open a bill of material that we have created, that we prepared for the skateboard already. It's that one that I used in the graphic. And this is it. This is our BOM. It's multi-level. I turned on I rolled up some costs. We can see that our cost here is about $47. And these are all the properties that I have defined in my catalog for this BOM. And here are as you can see, most of the structure exists in the axles. So I'm using OpenBOM, but other BOM and PLM applications, most will have some method for creating a view or a lens for you to look at the data. In OpenBOM, it's called a view. So these are a number of views that I've already prepared. We're going to take a look at these as well as create a couple of new ones. So just off the bat, let's take a look at what an engineering view looks like. It's not going to be too distinguishable. It has most all of the properties that I'm interested in. I often work in something like this myself, but I've done some things. I've pulled out this particular view doesn't have lead time. It also doesn't, in this view, I don't have vendor. This is something that the engineer who's building the structure and quantities and inspecting other aspects of it would work in. It's also the place where some of the reference data, here we have some CAD files and we have the 2D drawings and things would be defined and attached to the BOM. So this is a view where an engineer has both read and write access. We remember back a few slides, we defined the engineer as needing to have read as well as write access to the BOM. The engineer is an author. That's pretty straightforward. Let's start to tailor it a little bit more for others in our organization. I also have created ahead of time a view for our SLM folks. I call this my supply line manager view. Now this starts to become even more interesting. Of course, part number, and I haven't come across a case yet where someone doesn't want the image. Image is very important and easy to quickly identify what we're working on. But in this case, there's a lot of other information that I have that I've removed for this view, but it has some of the key information, cost that we're expecting, quantity, lead times are very important, quantity on hand, so maybe that supply line person can do some analysis about how many we need to order and whatnot. But I could see in this view that one key element, of course, is missing in that, and that is vendor. So let's take a look at, within OpenBOM, how we would make a change to the supply line manager view. We would open the view configuration tool, and on the left side are all the properties that are currently on display in the view. On the right side are all the properties that are available. I'm going to go ahead and add vendor, and I'd like to move that a little bit to the left. Okay. So we've added vendor to our bill of material, and we've also decided that, hey, our supply line folks really don't need to edit these bills of material. They are consumers. So let's go back and take a look at the view configuration. We'll make sure that they are set to read only. And again, most tools will have some way for you to manage this, but I'm going to set this to read only. We'll save that. So anyone in my organization now that is in my OpenBOM team can take a look at this through the supply line manager view and see that data in a way that's important to them. And this is the kind of thing where you would go on and decide with them what additional information they may or may not need. Okay, so moving to the right in our graphic, we recall that we had a CNC vendor. So let's go back and take a look at our bill of material, full size. And here's all of our information. We're going to create a view that we're going to share with our CNC vendor. And we don't have one right now, so let's create a new view. And I'm going to call this our CNC vendor view. And let's set that up right here from the beginning. So let's edit this. I'm going to first bring in all the properties. And I think we decided that, yeah, my CNC probably doesn't need to see cost. I may or may not want him to see vendors. There's a lot of information here. He probably needs file name. I certainly don't want him to see quantity on hand. He may need some links to some of the design files. I'm going to reduce down some of this information. I also only want my CNC vendor to have access to data that is flagged as manufacturing type code equals CNC. Okay, it's really important. So this is where I set up the view filters, and I'm saying when my CNC vendor comes in to look at my BOM, it's going to come in through this view, which we'll demonstrate in just a second in a little more detail. And when they look at this data, they are only going to see those things that are set to manufacturing type CNC. Apply that. Okay. So let's take a look at what our CNC vendor now will see. Okay. Looks like there's two items in our bill of material that are manufacturing type CNC. One, of course, is the board, skateboard deck itself. And then the other, I've modeled the cutout, which it goes on the bottom of the board where the axles mount, and those are specific to each set of axles. But I've modeled that as a solid feature, but it's representative of the machine code that my CNC guy would need. So that's really interesting. One thing that I didn't do, of course, I want to go back and double check for my CNC vendor. Okay. I want to make sure that they do not have, while they have read access, they don't have the ability to change any of this data. I'm going to go ahead and set that to read only. Now you ask yourself, okay, so my CNC vendor is outside my organization. He might not be, might not have an email address or a sign-in for OpenBOM like the rest of my members do. I add him or her to my team, and in OpenBOM, that's done through the team administrator panel. And there's a lot of information on how this is done. But I've gone ahead and added. I've used the add command here, and I've added a new member to my team. I've called this member the CNC by the name of the CNC company's account, and I'm going to set their access rather than being read or write or edit. I'm going to set their access to by view. And here's what that means. That means that when they sign in and take a look at my information, they will only be viewing that data through this particular view. So to close on that, so when my CNC vendor signs in, he or she will see exactly this view that I have defined for them. And there's a lot more information. I'll put some links in the reference on how to do that. So finally, and we're not going to go through it here, finally I would go ahead and create a view for my QA folks and give them access to the information that they need as well. So let me jump back. I want to be sensitive to the time. We jump back to my presentation, kind of give you some closing thoughts and take any questions if you have any, if we have time. So So here's how to get the most out of the who gets what BOM in your BOM webinar, is to watch webinars 2, 13, and 14. These are the essentials to creating an effective BOM, and the other two that we just discussed about what goes in your BOM and defining other roles and things. Use the list from this webinar to identify those roles, and for each of those roles, create a list of properties on paper that they need to see and their access. Then use whatever tool you use to manage your bills of materials, use that tool to create some views for each roles and set permissions and save those views by a particular name. And then finally, when you invite those users, in our case, those CNC subcontractors in, when you invite those additional roles in, either by sharing your BOM directly with them or, as we did here, adding them to our team, be sure you identify that they come in with access through that particular view. That will govern their views. Okay, so here's some terrific references that I'd like to point out for you. There's a nice 5 steps to good BOM practices that by one of our colleagues on there. Some other Open BOM related information, the YouTube playlist here, so that you can review the other webinars from 2019, as well as others. So, and a link to where I'd like you to start if you haven't done so, is take a look at webinar number 2, creating a well-organized BOM. So I am looking at the time. I'm sorry that we are currently out of time. I'd like to ask any of you to send your questions to support@openbom.com. We answer all emails that come in there quickly. It's been a pleasure spending time with you over the last 15 weeks with these webinars, and I look forward to seeing you all in 2020. Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.